Hello everyone, and welcome to this new webinar about how to raise money. So today we are talking about a few things. The difference between debt financing and equity financing, the typical terms that investors ask and you should be giving or not, depending on the terms, to investors during your fundraising, and how to recognize bad investors. And we also had a few examples of practical things that I've seen during my career. So again, the disclose, I'm not an expert in fundraising for later stage companies at all. In our portfolio, we only have a few companies, 2 or 3 that raised more than 100 million, and we have another 45 that raised seed and round A. And so my practical experience is more targeted versus pre-seed and seed, so early stage funds, early stage fundraising. So today that's what I will talk about. And please understand so that this is the limit of what is where I have opinions, where I have experience. So in short, to start, debt. So if you have a company that needs money to raise, to grow the company, need money to grow the company, you basically have 2 ways of doing it. And one way is called debt, which means that basically you're receiving money from someone, typically a bank, and in exchange, you pay back this money with an interest. And the other way is called equity financing, and so you receive money, and typically it's not from a standard bank, will be more from a business angel or a venture firm or a private equity, and in exchange, you give shares of your company. So in the first case, debt, basically is for low profile, low risk investments, where the bank know that you will be able to pay back, and they earn that small interest rate. That's all the revenue they make, that all small interest rate. And on the other side, on equity, the investor will earn money if you sell your company. So if you sell your company for $1 billion and they own 10%, they basically get 100 million. So in one way, they're not sharing the risk with you, but they're providing capital and the benefits are all with you if you're successful. In the other way, you share the risk of the business and you give a small portion to the investor in case you win. So there is also another way of building companies. So this way, you finance the company in this way if you need capital. There is also some other companies that do not need capital, and that is called organic growth. So the first company I founded, Translated, is actually in this category. I never raised money for Translated. And the reason why today we're talking about equity and debt is that because those startups are very rare, so it's not very useful to talk about them. So I still love organic growth, and I think it's the best way to grow companies, but it's not very applicable. And the reason why it's not applicable, because it takes a very, very long time. And not all the businesses allow this long time to execute. So my first business was in the translation business, and an industry that was very, very reluctant. So I could play a strategy that was on a 20 years time scales. And if you have this opportunity, then you can take the revenues from your first product you sell, reinvest it, and grow it. So in this case, basically, you don't have, you haven't give away equity, but I will take a very, very long amount of time. So coming back, debt and equity. In equity is the way for the last 30, 40 years company grew. And if you look at all the most capitalized company you find in the stock market, I would say that probably all of them, 95%, maybe 1 out of 20 in the top 20 grew with debt. All the others grew with equity. So equity is the way companies in the new economy are growing. And the reason for this is simple, is that because as we're moving forward and technology becomes the driver for growth, banks are not very well designed to provide debt to technology companies. And because technology companies are much riskier. And so they should apply an interest rate which is too high. And when I say too high, it means they cannot ask for that 3%. They should be asking 30, 40% per year to compensate the risk. And that is forbidden by the law in many, many countries. So you have a limit by law in the interest rate in many countries. So that model becomes non-suitable for this. Also psychologically, one thing is that you have someone that gave you money and you have to give back with this big interest rate, and the other way is someone that is sharing the risk with you. So the second, equity, is putting you more in the condition to express your potential because you know that the investor is ready to lose all his money in exchange of a small opportunity to create the next Google. So I would say that not all the entrepreneurs are suitable for equity investment. And I have a very simple way to establish when is right for you to use equity investment, so raise money from investor. And so the method is simple. Ask yourself if you prefer to own 100% of an $100 million company or 10% of a $1 billion company. So at the end, 100% of 100 million is 100 million of net worth, and 10% of $1 billion is again 100 million. But what would you prefer? Do you want to control the company at 100% and take the direction you want? Or at the end of this process, you want to have 10% of something very big and impactful? So if I ask this, the funny thing is that, so if I ask this question to people in the United States, 90% of them will say that they want 10% of $1 billion company because they want impact. And if I ask this in Italy, where I live, 90% will say that they want 100% of an $100 million company. Okay? So there is a cultural element for sure there, very important. But the method that I suggest you is that if you want to own 100%, then go for debt financing. That's the thing for you. See, if the equivalent money is the same, the money you earn is the same, and you prefer owning and controlling, debt is the suitable solution for you. If at the very end you're okay at having 10%, then equity financing is the best way. And those route investments, so if we get into the methodology and we say, okay, let's go with equity financing, the different stage are called pre-seed, seed, then round A, round B, round C, up to the IPO. There is also something called ICO, which is for cryptocurrency, but it's a completely different topic. So today we will focus on this stage of investment. So typically, when you raise money in pre-seed, is very the beginning of the company. You just have an idea, you have done nothing. Very often you haven't even created the company yet. And an investor will give you 50,000 euro or dollars in exchange of about 10% of the company. So these numbers, I'm telling you the number of Europe, and then I will tell you what happened in California. So in Europe, let's say 50,000 for 10% in pre-seed. And then you do a seed round and you raise 500,000 and you give away 20% of the company. Then in round A, you give away about 2 million and you give another 20% out. So if you do the same thing in the US, not in the US, really in the Bay Area, the numbers, the evaluation and the amount of money raised would be 2x or 3x, the numbers I told you. But it's not a very big difference at the end, because also the reason why they're much higher is because the cost also involved in running the startup is much higher. So the cost of hiring the people and the services that you'll need. So at the end, when you raise money in a certain stage, is because you need a certain amount of months for executing. And so in California, you will need more money for the similar stage of round. So, and if you look at companies like Airbnb, Dropbox, Facebook, and YouTube, and many very recent startups, they all follow this very simple path. And from outside, venture capital looks creative. In the end, is one of the most way of building companies. And so they all follow this path. Now for Dropbox, if I remember correctly, $1,000 with I don't see myself there. Is it okay? Where should I repeat something? So maybe Silvio, tell us if we're back live. It looks like all okay, perfect. So I don't know what we missed. So I was telling some numbers, some examples. So if for Dropbox, for example, what happened is that they raised $15,000 from Y Combinator, and they gave away about 7% of the company. And just after, if I remember, they raised about 1.2 million, and that was maybe 6-7 million evaluation. And then they raised 6 million at 30 million, 28, 30 if I remember correctly. And then they raised 100 million at 1 billion, and then 250 million at 4 billion. And so you see it's a process that looks like very, very similar. So there is not a big difference in the way you progress a company. Facebook followed a very similar path, and many others will do the same. So very successful company still use that path and stages. Maybe the difference is that they do it faster. So instead of having maybe 2 years or 1 year and a half between one round and the other, this will happen in 6 months if the company is growing very fast. So, but the stage and the evaluation tend to be extremely simple. So, so how to do this evaluation is tricky. Many people ask me how much my company is worth. What should I ask? At the end, really the amount of money your company is worth when raising money does not really depend on the company a lot. It really depends on the stage where you are and the amount of capital you're raising. And it looks counterintuitive, but if you're raising 2 million, really, your company is probably worth 8-10 million. And the reason is simple, because at the end, you want to give away 20% of the company. So obviously, at that time, the company is not really worth 8 million. Nobody will buy the company for 10 million. So why is someone paying 2 million? And the reason is basically two. Number one is that because they should be minority investors. They want to make sure that the founder owns the very majority of the company. And since this will be economically unfair because it's not worth that money, what they do, they create shareholders agreements with terms that compensate that high evaluation. So they basically set a prospective evaluation, a future possible evaluation, and then they ask for terms in the contract to compensate the risk. And we will see this in a second. But before I get to the terms, many founders very often think that the way to measure the success of the company is about how much money they raise it and what evaluation do they got. And the true story is that the evaluation tells a very small portion of the story. The terms often are the most important thing, because you may get, even today, a $1 billion evaluation with a company you're just starting, and then basically giving away 100x liquidation preferences to the investors. So at the end, you will never see a penny from your company, and all the money will go to the investors. So at the end, evaluation is just an arbitrary number you put that is then compensated by the terms. So I think understanding the terms is then the most important thing a founder should do. And there are fair terms when raising money and unfair terms. And the most successful founders and company I know always raised money on very similar terms and very small amount of terms. So good investors tend to ask less protections than bad investors. And we will explain this in a second. But to go straight to the terms, the typical terms that you should be looking into and learn is three. One is called a liquidation preference. The second one is called a bad lever. And the third is called a tag along. So liquidation preference is probably the easier way to understand, and it's the easiest thing. Let's say that you receive $1 million from an investor for 10% of your company. So he's evaluating the company about 10 million. What the investor asks is that liquidation preference 1x means that if we sell this company at the end, not for 100 million, but only for 1 million, the first money, the 1 million is going only to the investor. And if you're selling it for 10 million, no problem. 1 million is going to the investor, 9 million are going to you. So liquidation preference means that if there are dividends or if there is a sales of shares of the company, the first money go to the investor to repay the investment. So you see that already this create an asymmetry in terms of share values. So investor shares, even if it's only 10%, then are worth more than the founder shares because they have preferential rights. So that's the trick, the simplest trick, the first trick that you use to set up an high evaluation, not giving a lot of shares, and then you're giving back this liquidation preference at 1x. So what is fair is to see liquidation preference at 1x, so 1 time the capital invested. People asking liquidation preference at 2x, 3x, 4x are very often not very good investors. I will explain why in a second. The best investors I've ever met do a 1x liquidation preference. Sometimes someone will add a small interest rate into it, like a 5% interest rate. So it's 1x and then 5% that gets every year. But already this is going in the direction of bad investors. The best will stay with a 1x liquidation preference. So the second term is called a bad lever. And this is fun. I remember a friend who was setting up a company, and when I told him about the bad lever clause, he said he understood that we're talking about the lever, so the organ. And he was saying, okay, so you really are saying that this clause is because it will hurt my liver. Okay, no, it's not that. And another friend understood that bad liver clause was the bed, so in your bedroom, and so liver, that you are leaving the bed. And so he was thinking about like a company being a wedding between the founder and the investor, and someone was leaving the bed, the wedding bed. No, so bad liver in the sense that you're leaving the company in a bad way. Okay, what does it mean? So when investors give money, they are setting up this high valuation, and they're saying, and you as a founder, you're providing a commitment to work in the company for a certain time. So the bad lever clause says that if you link the company in the first 3 years, let's say, could be 4, 5, 2, from the investment, then basically the investors are taking your shares. So if you don't believe in the project after 1 year and you leave, your shares will be given proportionally to the other shareholders. So this is the second way you compensate the equation. Okay? The third way is called a tag along, that I think is something very fair. Sometimes you don't find it in contracts, but I think it's a quite reasonable thing to give to investors, is that what you're saying is that if you sell your shares as founders, you have also to allow the investors to sell their shares. So if you create a nice company worth $1 billion and you own still 60% of it, you cannot simply sell your 60% and leave the investors inside the company without you. So the investors invested in you, and so if you sell your 60%, so they should be able to sell their 40%. If you sell 50% of your shares, so 30%, they should be allowed to sell also 50% of their share. That's very easy to make sure that someone that gave trust to you will not remain in the company that you basically sold. Obviously, they have the right and the opportunity to stay if they want, but tag along is their right to sell together with you if you do it. So again, to repeat, the best investors will only ask these 3 terms. Liquidation preference, you're giving back the money to the investors if your company does not sell out for a very big amount. So if they invested 1 million, the first million go back to investors. There is also different ways of treating the remaining part, but that's technical details, will not make too much difference. Bad lever, it means that if you receive money, you will have a commitment in staying in the company for a certain period, and if you leave the company, then basically you lose your shares. And third thing, tag along. So if you sell your shares as founders, the investor should be able to sell their shares proportionally. So if you meet a venture fund that is asking for many other clauses on top of these, it's very probably that it's a bad investor. And I can explain you this very easily. So think about this. The best venture firm in the world made their success on about 10% of their company becoming very, very, very big. So they focus all the strengths and power to help the company that will become the next Google. They know that they can find a successful company. They don't care about losing money 9 times out of 10 because they know that one of those will become the next Google. So those investors focus more on the upside of an investment rather than thinking about the protecting on the 9 times out of 10 where they lose money. Very bad investors, they know they typically don't invest in company that can be the next Google. So the way they try to survive as a venture fund is that they try to protect their investment and try to recoup as much money as they can from the failing investment. So those companies that are shutting down or are kind of surviving. So bad investors focus on veto rights because they want to control when things go bad, how they can do it. They will add drag clauses in their favor so that at one point, even if they have only 10%, they can decide to sell the other 90%, and they have the right to do it. So, or they may ask a seat in the board, for example, or observing right in many things, or worst, even veto rights in the business, in the execution of the business. You know, all these clauses are designed to try to recoup some money from the investment that are now going so well. The best investors focus just on the upside, and they're very okay with losing all their monies on 9 times out of 10 or 7 times out of 10 for the good VCs that still have a lower risk profile. So there's one other thing I would like to mention in terms of terms that was invented by Y Combinator. Is something called SAFE. So because it was, still there was this psychological element about the evaluation and founders that were competing one on the other to show that their company is worth more by adding more evaluation. And because also doing a formal round, it takes a lot of time and you need to collect signature from all the investors in the same time. So Y Combinator designed an investment agreement that is very simple. It's called SAFE, which stands for Simple Agreement for Future Equity. So technically it's not, but really it's like a convertible debt. And how it works is that you provide money as an investor to a company, let's say 100,000, and the company will tell you just the cap. So the maximum evaluation at which they will convert the money. So you're just borrowing the money to the company, and then when they will do a future round, you will convert at an evaluation that is established before. So let's say you invest 1 million at 10 million in a SAFE, and then you go and the company will raise 10 million at 100 million. At that round, you will get shares at $10 million evaluation because you have a cap at 10 million. So you can download that model, that SAFE model from the Y Combinator website. Most of the investments that we do in California are done with SAFE in the early stage. It's very, very fast, and again, it has the very similar terms. Basically, it has only a liquidation preference 1x. That's all what is in there. So very, very friendly for the founders and super easy to execute. And why is also because you basically come to an investor, you get the signature, you get the money, and it's done. You don't have to wait for the signature of everyone. They can do asynchronous. You can do this asynchronous. The other thing is also high resolution. It means that, let's say that if that investor comes before anyone else and is much better than any other investor you may have, you can give better condition to that investor without breaking the rule of the round. So the first investor that moved fast and is nice and is good one, you make a $5 million evaluation in the SAFE, and then the one that come later and are less strategic, you can do at 8 or 10, for example. So this is something that SAFE allows you to have high resolution and also being asynchronous. So I think to conclude, we talked about the difference between equity and debt, and if you want to build technology startups, equity is probably the way to go, and debt will be suitable for you if you really want to own 100% of your company. The Dropbox founders a few years ago, I think Drew owned 13% of Dropbox. So it's a company worth almost 10 billion. And so you get diluted at the end. No, it's you have a big net worth as a founder, billion, but you dilute yourself with equity. So if you don't want to dilute yourself, go with debt and take a low risk profile. If you want to accelerate fast, go with equity. And be prepared at the end of the story, 10 years after, maybe having just 10% of a very, very large company. You can go with organic growth, as I did with Translated. That will take a very, very long amount of time, and not all industries are suitable for that. So mine, in the space of translation, was a slow evolving industry, and it did work very well for me. We said about the terms, so liquidation preference, bet lever, tag along, that's the things you should only look. If you see veto rights, requirement of having a seat on the board, those things are alarms that you should look into and understand that maybe that's not the investor that typically invests in super successful company. And have a look to the safe, which is another alternative to doing a round. It's much faster. Unfortunately, not in all geography the safe is legal as it is set, so it's designed for US companies, but in most countries you can adapt it to use a similar model. And the last thing to say is that doing an investment round is about making everyone happy around the table. And it's not about winning one over the other. So if you try to obtain a much higher valuation, you're just putting pressure on the next round you will do. And again, you put an high evaluation, but still the investor has got a liquidation preference. So this is just ego. You're measuring your ego with your evaluation. It's not really changing many things. So you have to make sure that all the people, the investors, the founders, the other employee that's got stock options are all happy around the table. And one thing I wanted to share with you, that the most successful founder I've seen are those charismatic people that are able to drive this process and make sure that everybody is happy. They're not reactive to investors, they're proactive, and they really act the role with a big heart. They really take care of everyone around the table. And when this happens, as an investor, you say, okay, you start trusting the founders so much that basically you follow every future direction where you're going. So take care of everyone around the table as a founder, and this will make your life much easier for the long journey that building a startup is. Thank you so much for your time, and I think we can go with a couple of questions. But to do so, I will need a computer that works here. So this one doesn't have the Wi-Fi. So if you can come with the questions, then we can do it. Or maybe I can look in there. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So, I missed the question. I don't know if you can send the question again. So, do you suggest to follow all the steps? I mean, start from a small amount. Yeah, so, well, I typically recommend to do the entire flow. So start and do all the steps. And unless you really are in the condition where you have done a lot of investment on yourself, and so you're not going to raise 100,000 or 500 and you're starting with 2 million because you did already that investment, then I think you can go to the next round. Otherwise, start with a small round and then create momentum and speed up the process and accelerate that. So you don't need to wait 2 years to raise your round A. You can just do it in a shorter amount of time. So I see a question from Dennis. So if I've seen difference in the evaluation. So the evaluation in the last 15 years were up and down, and really depends on the availability of capital in the market. So sometimes there is more capital available in the venture firms, and so they need to allocate the capital, and that brings evaluation a little high. But at the end, it would never be 10x. So you're talking about 20, 30% variation. And at the very end of your story, it will not impact the company at all, even if it's not making any difference. So startups are about 0 or 1. So if you lose some because the market were low, and you lose some equity or you earn, that doesn't make the difference. The important is building something that people love and being able to keep financing the project on the long run. If you win, that 20%, it will not make a big difference if you as a founder earned 1 billion or 1.2 billion. You will be happy anyway. So this is Elisa. Thank you. Very interesting, clear words. Okay, when do you suggest is the perfect time to start to look? And then I don't know for what, because we see the dots. So if the question were when to look for raising money, and I will say the recommendation is raise money as soon as you have something that you know people want. So if you raise money before proving that people want potentially what you're building, you will lose money. If you raise money afterward, you have something that people want, this will accelerate your growth. So never think about the money as the way you gain interest from users. The money are used to sustain what people want. And for example, and it doesn't mean that you have to build everything. When you go out, you talk to people, you discover that many people are asking you to build something, and they're saying, okay, we're willing to buy this now. And then you raise the money to build it. But don't raise money before you have found something that people want. That's my recommendation. So, and I see that Luis is asking about advisors. And so, sorry, there's many questions. I cannot answer all, so I'm taking those random. So I have Luis, and then also this one that's appeared from Claudio. So since Luis is there, I read this quickly from Claudio, and then we go back to Luis. So I'm raising a Series A, yeah, we lost it. And we lost the question, we didn't have the time. So I go with Luca first, and then we go back to the other, so to Luis. So practice for the advisors. How do we find the best advisor? How much do we give advisors? Yeah, typical advisor shares would be between 0.25 and 1%, 2%. That's the typical. And what I suggest is that you create a pool of shares for advisors, and you create also a pool of shares for employees. And maybe you can create a pool of 5% for your advisors and another 10%, 15% for the employees. That's a very good idea. And then you just create the pool and then you provide those as you go. And always remember, and we're not talking about gaming shares before and upfront, is about vested shares. So if the advisor will work for you and with you for 3 years, they're vesting each year a certain number of shares. So if you're giving 0.3, you're giving 0.1 the first year, 0.2 the second year, and 0.3 the third year. So, and that's the typical way. So advisors are not for 20%, so small amount of shares, below 1 or just above 1, and make sure you have also a pool for the employees. So I'm raising a series round in these weeks by having 35,000 customers and 1 million in revenue in 2020. Should I focus my pitch deck more on the vision project or on the metrics? Well, I can tell about myself, for example, as an investor, traction in an unexpected market is what I love. So if you're showing that there is an increasing number of people buying your product, and it was counterintuitive because it was something that other people didn't believe that people wanted this, that is incredible. So even if I don't understand why people are buying it, but you have a metric of people buying continuously and increasing week over week, that is what I love. So if you have that, make sure you show your traction as the only and the main important slide to raise money. And I think many great investors will not need other things. If you see a traction that happened for over a year, week over week, constant growth, that is an unbreakable company, and everything else is just a consequence. If you don't have that, then make sure you show the metric and talk a lot about what next you will do to build that kind of company. So I think we can take a few more questions. So any suggestion regarding best practice to involve advisors? Oh yes, that's Luis. I think we already answered that question just before. So I said what Luis is writing here is absolutely correct. So make a pool for advisors. Don't give more than 1% to advisors. That's typical. No, 0.25 to 2%. That's perfect. Are there any instrument or agreement that can allow founders to retake share from past investors? Well, you can buy shares with debt, but it's in common. So, but you can do it in different ways. Let's say that you started the company with one investor, and then you raised money with other investor, and you magically discover that your first investor is not that good as the new one, is not very supportive, is not aligned with the direction of the company. So you have two ways. If your company is already profitable, you can borrow money from the bank and buy back the investor together, so with the money from the company. And so you're buying proper shares. You're buying shares, the company is buying its own shares from the investor and becomes distributed by the others. The other way is a secondary transaction. So you, in your next round of financing, the new investor is buying the shares of the old investors and investing. And typically, maybe the terms for buying the shares are slightly different than the new round. Sometimes, no, they can buy shares at a discount because that is cash in that moment. So maybe they can buy a 20% discount over the round evaluation. And so sometimes venture capital love it, they can get a bigger share, and you can get the investor you want more in the company. So for Italian startup who develop their business in Italy to start, which country and what stage would you consider expanding, immediately or not? Oh, salut Pierre. So, in Italy there is a few things where you don't even need to expand too much abroad. So every market has got its unique strength. Italy, if you're building a startup in fashion, design, or food, you have the best early adopters in the world. The best customers are here, and they will buy your product, and you can create a quite large company before going out. If you're building a database company, for example, that locally you will not find a lot of investors and not of customers, and not even a lot of people to employ, to hire for your project. So I will think you should be building an international company from day one. And so it really depends on the vertical where you are, and that defines when to expand. We have to remember that the US is a market of 300 million people that speaks the same language, driven by the same laws, and where Italy represents only 2% of the world economy. In France, maybe 3%, in Germany 4%. So in Europe, it's very fragmented. Everybody speaks a different language, and we have national rules. So it's much harder. And so if you're building a company in Italy, you will go international on average. So if we don't think about the market, much before a US company. So I strongly suggest to start in your local geography things that make sense in your geography. If you're in Italy, design, fashion, food, that's our great things. Now think about Hughes, $6 billion company, and US organization like Amazon did not even realize what was happening in the field of e-commerce for fashion. So brilliant execution. And another company here in Rome, Octo Telematics. So insurance, local market is very strong. And they created the world leader in insurance telematics with 6 million cars having their device installed in the car. So you really need to find something where you can hire great people locally, and there are early adopters, and then you can grow that a lot before expanding. Otherwise, think about being global from day one and buy translations from Translated. I'm joking. So which is the way to get in touch with Italian investors? Where are they? Events? So first you're talking to one. So if you have something great, marco@picampus.it. Please, so I do invest locally in Italy and internationally. 25% of the investments are in Italy, 25% are in Europe, and 50% are in the Bay Area. So wherever you are, would be a pleasure to evaluate your pitch. If you're talking about other early stage investors, business angels is the way to go. There is a couple association of business angels in Italy, Italian Angel for Growth, and a second one, cannot remember the name, but it's connected to Lewis and Labs, great angel network. So you can contact those associations, and they have regularly meetings where they do present companies to their members. Second thing, look at the accelerators. So if you're in Italy, H Farm, L Venture, Nana Bianca, So are great accelerators. If you're international, please look at Y Combinator, that by far the best accelerator in the world. And that's a very easy way. And typically they provide about 100,000 euro in exchange of about 10% of equity. 7%, 10%, something like this. And for the early stage, so if you're raising about 2 million in Italy, locally, and I'm answering to about Italy because the question was about that, there is only 6 or 7 venture fund. It's easy to contact them, so Innogest, Primo Miglio, United Ventures, great venture fund managed by Massimiliano Magrini. And if you are in the center and south of Italy, the best fund is Vertis, which is based in Naples, very active. Amedeo is a great investor. So, and P101 also in Milan, and 360 Capital Partners, and Panakes, if you're in the biotech. Those are the names, and not many. Type those, they always have a contact form where you can send the pitch. And for later stage, go on Crunchbase, in your country, get the list of the VCs. It's quite easy. And every VC will have a very easy way to contact them. If you don't know how to pitch to investor, I made another video on how to pitch, but also you can go on marcotrombetti.com and go to how to pitch. And then I give you the 5 slides that those venture fund would like to have for an initial discussion. I think we're taking the last question. So how much the 6 cents count, and if they're also a bit irrational. The best investor, yes, are totally irrational, but I think that what you consider irrational is probably the most rational thing out there. So, you know, our brain is divided in multiple parts, and very often I'm not able to, I have so many feedback that I'm not able in the conscious way to connect the dots of the great things. And so there is a message that is coming from my subconscious that is saying, oh, wow, that's a great company. And very often I don't connect the dots, but I know that my brain is doing it in the hidden part. And so I personally trust it a lot. And also because venture capital is a very risk business. So we work hard to minimize the risk on every different thing, but at the end is about human relationship, and it's about the people that are able to build the impossible, build things that rationally doesn't make sense. So I also love naive people that underestimate problem, because they do, they try to attack problems that other people feared. So there is a lot of element of irrationality, if someone would say rational, but I consider those very rational. And then there is ego in some venture funds, and that's just a bad behavior you should avoid. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope this was useful. So if you need more information about how to start your startup, please visit marcotrombetti.com, and you will find 12 essays on why to start up, more inspirational, and how to start up. And if you have a great pitch, please apply to PyCampus, and we want to invest in more founders that are going to build great things. Thanks again.